Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. And today we are going to be looking at 5 players who could make their Springbok debut in 2026. And looking at these players, lots of them I think on the radar. 4 of them have been involved in alignment camps, and one player, ironically, who hasn't been involved in alignment camp, who I think is probably the most likely to debut because he is just absolutely smashing the door down at the moment with performances week in and week out. And it's going to be an interesting year because now we're into the final, by the time we start, the final 18 months until the 2027 World Cup, which means that there's not a lot of opportunity to really get new players involved, blood new players necessarily, and sort of try and get them to the amount of cats that we'd like them to have. It's also a year where we don't have necessarily like an Italy incoming tour, for example. We've got the greatest rivalry tour, so it's not really a year conducive to handing out debuts. However, if there are injuries and if there are certain positions that the Springbok management are worried about, then I think these are players who are very much on the radar who could potentially come in and get the opportunity. Before we get into the players, please do smash the like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Right, let's get into it, shall we? So player number 1, I've got Neethling for sure. Now, he has officially turned out in a Springbok jersey, but hasn't been officially capped because it was against the Barbarians. Now, he's had a bit of a weird year. I think he can be a bit frustrated with his year, really, because he got called into the Springbok alignment camps. He's been involved in quite a few alignment camps. Called into an official squad, got an opportunity against the Barbarians, did not feature after that. Asnathi Tlhabakanye did debut and got quite a few caps to his name. But then in the end of your tour, even with the injuries, we saw the Springboks call up Zachary Paulson and give him a debut and game time ahead of Neethling for sure. So it's pretty evident for me, I think, right now that Neethling for sure probably sits at maybe 6th or 7th choice tight head. However, a lot of this for me hinges on what happens with Asnathi Tlhabakanye's hearing, which is scheduled to be about March, April. And if there's a ban, for example, that obviously rules him out, in which case, if there are any sort of further injuries, we're hoping to see Frans Malherbe soon, then I think Neethling for sure potentially gets this opportunity. And I think that the nice thing about the Boks, and this is maybe why they're not too worried about him, is he's a seasoned pro. He's played a lot of rugby over the years for he played, first started for the Bulls, he played for the Chiefs, but then obviously he's become a Stormer stalwart. And I think he's so experienced that I don't think he's somebody who's going to take a long time to get sort of used to the level of international rugby. Very, very solid form. I don't think really lets you down. So I think he'd be an interesting option. I do think that right now I don't think he's really within the pecking order. However, injuries could dictate that he becomes an option over there. Number 2 is this man right here. And that is Jean Augustus, who, again, I think, had he not been for injured, I think he probably would have already been capped because 8th man was a problem position last year in that we had everybody was injured. Jean-Luc Dupré getting injured. We had Kwaka Smith injured at a stage. We had Jasper Wiese obviously also with a ban. He had to come back. We had Evan Roos was dropped and then also injured. Jean Augustus was injured. Cameron Harnicom injured. Albert Lowe injured. So we had an 8th man crisis last year. And I think that, again, if it were not for the injury that he himself had sustained, I think he could have got an opportunity. And I'd really like to see him get an opportunity. I mean, this is somebody who was always sort of destined to really play for the Springboks from quite a young age. When you looked at the physicality he brought at sort of age group rugby, a good leader as well, went overseas, now playing for Ulster, which I think it was a Springbok directed move in terms of not necessarily coming back to South Africa, but playing week in, week out in a league that is monitored or better monitored by the Springbok coaches. And I think that if we do have a couple of injuries in 8th man this year, hopefully we'll have Albert Lowe back. Then I think we need to get him some games. I think he becomes a genuine option moving forward. He's a great player. I don't think very reliable. I think he'll do a good job. I think he's been unfortunate not to have gotten an opportunity sooner, but maybe 2026 is the year he does finally get that chance. And then a little bit of a left field one there, potentially Harsh Impede. This is a player who's been involved in the Boks squad. Now, there's been a lot of people quite upset about the lack of game time he's had for the Lions. I think that he'll get a lot more moving forward. I think that by the end of the season, I keep saying, I think that by the end of the season, he probably will have 300-400 minutes for the Lions. I reckon. I genuinely believe that. I think that obviously the Lions will have to rotate quite a bit. They will have to give Morne van den Berg some time off. And the 20-year-old, he's just got it, doesn't he? He came on this past weekend for 14 minutes and he literally won the game. He literally won the game. And I think that, yes, he's only had, I think it's about 40-odd minutes of professional rugby so far for the Lions in terms of a URC point of view. But the Boks do rate him very, very high. He's obviously already been involved in a Boks squad with the likes of Bartosz Klekane and Cheswell Jooste. And I also think that right now, from a scrum perspective, Jaden Hendricks is kind of off the radar. Herschel Yankees kind of gone off the radar. So, you got obviously our three current, Kobus Reinach, Morne van den Berg, and Grant Williams. But again, if they're injuries, you obviously got to fight to Clerk. But, will they go to embrace Pierre, or will they take a risk and take a bit of a gamble on the youngster who just screams international talent and potentially international superstar? So, bit of a left field one. Obviously, you'll have to start playing a bit more for the Lions. But to be fair, something like a Zachary Porthan barely played for the Stormers before he got drafted into the Boks. So that's not necessarily a prerequisite. It wouldn't be completely out of the rounds possibility for him to go into the Boks squad, despite maybe not having played as much for the Lions themselves. Next to somebody who I think has been quite close. I think Sebastian de Klerk's been around those training camps and squads. And if it weren't for, I think, if a couple more injuries, the way we were going last year, I think he might have gotten a debut. I mean, this is a player who really is starting to smash the door down. He's scoring tries for fun for the Bulls. He's electrifyingly fast, very good skill set. And unfortunately for him, competing in a position where we just do have tremendous depth. Kirkley Arendse, Makazuma Pimpy, Sheldon Colby, Edward van der Merwe, Ethan Hooker. It's a very difficult position to try and sort of break in. But I do think that he's a player that is on the radar, and especially moving forward. He's nice and young. He's got years ahead of him. Playing for the Bulls has made that switch from the Bulls very, very seamlessly, and could be an outside shout. And then for me, the one who I think has to get a debut and potentially has to go to the World Cup, just the way he's playing. Maybe not necessarily the World Cup, but that's this man right here. Paul de Villiers has been absolutely sensational for the Stormers this season. I mean, I think right now, if you had to choose a player of the season, he'd probably be in the top three candidates, really. And we finally seem to have our long-term fetcher replacement. And whether it's a starter, for example, or whether potentially he's going to take on the bomb squad role, become the next Kwagga Smith, which would be fantastic as well. He just brings impact. He's nice and physical. He's really, really good at the breakdown. And, Renzo du Plessis has been looked at from the Boks as a more of the current number 6 option. I think this guy will get ahead of him. And I think that if he continues to play the way he has been playing, the Boks will have no choice but to give him an opportunity at some point this year if there are injuries. So I don't think that any of these are necessarily locked on. I'm hoping one of the 5 might get a debut. But again, at the same time, we've had so many players get debuts, so many players inside the mix. When you think of the 55-man squad that was announced originally last year at the beginning of the season, of which some of these players were in. That we don't have a lot of time to start bringing in new players. But if injuries do start to dictate that we have to start bringing in other players and getting the opportunities, I think these are 5 players who are very much ready for Test match rugby and could make a big impact with the Boks. Well, let me know what you think. Which ones are the ones you think might debut? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.